Hey everybody, welcome to this week's edition of Title Scoop. This week we're going to talk about cemeteries. I know this isn't a topic that we discuss a lot and we probably don't see them very often, if at all, but because it is a high-risk area, I wanted to just go over the common requests when you see these and then what to look out for. So if you have a request to insure a cemetery or a burial plot, there's usually three ways you might see that. One, it could be land that includes a cemetery or a burial plot on it. It could be an actual cemetery itself, so the entire cemetery is being sold, or it might be someone asking to insure an individual burial plot. So first things first, if you get a request to insure an individual burial plot, the answer is no. We can't insure those. Those are personal property. They're not viewed as real property. There's not fee simple title. And although they are transferable, that's usually going to be in the books of the owner and whatever his requirements are. And it's really more of an easement or a license transfer. So it's not a fee simple deed that's being conveyed. The next situation you might see would be if someone has a piece of land they're buying and there's a burial plot or a cemetery that's included. So maybe it's acreage and there's a burial plot at the back. And they're trying to figure out, can we insure over that? The answer is generally no, unless it's really been abandoned, and we're gonna go into that in a little bit. But for the most part, you really wanna be aware that if you see anything on your chain of title that references a burial plot or cemetery, you could see that on deeds, you might see it in restrictions, you might see it in a dedication, I've seen it on plats, I've seen it on surveys. So there's a lot of places that you can see it, and if you do, you can't ignore it. You have to make sure that you basically put three exceptions, and those three exceptions are as follows. So exclude the land that is identified as the cemetery or burial plot. We're not going to insure over that. Second, you're gonna set out the rights of ingress and egress to that cemetery or burial plot. And then three, you're gonna set out any rights or claims of parties in actual or constructive possession or any interest in the land for the purpose of the burial plot or cemetery. So those are the three things you want to include. And again, if you guys want those, I've got those written out and I can send them to you. So just shoot me an email. I'm happy to send those to you. Just so you know, the background on cemeteries, for the most part, to be created is through dedication. Now that can be statutory or it can be common law. Some states have tons of statutory provisions on how a cemetery is created, how it's abandoned and terminated, and some have pretty much nothing at all. So if you have a request to insure over, or if you have a cemetery at all and you're trying to figure out what's going on, again, reach out to your underwriter. These are pretty high risk, so you want to make sure you're reaching out. I usually tell people, think of them a little bit like railroads. Railroads, if you have a railroad on your property, you need to follow a specific procedure in order to insure over it. There's a process for abandonment. It's really similar with cemeteries for the most part. So if you have a cemetery and someone's claiming, well, this is abandoned, no one has used it for 40 years, you can't just ignore it. There's going to be a process that you have to follow. And again, that could be statutory, it might be something else, but you're going to need your underwriter to tell you what exactly you need to have your client do in order to insure over that, if it's even possible. So the last thing you might get requested, and I think I've only seen this once, is if the entire cemetery is being sold, in which case we might be able to insure, but you really want your underwriter to give approval. When you have a tract of land being used as a cemetery, you need to make sure it's properly dedicated. You're going to want to make sure there's no prior restrictions against the sale or the usage. And then it really needs to be permissible under applicable law. So an example I had of a cemetery being sold, a not-for-profit owned it, and they were trying to sell to a for-profit. And when we dug down, the restrictions actually said it always had to be a not-for-profit that owned. So for them to actually sell it, they had to sort of jump through some hoops. And I actually think the deal fell through, if I recall. It's been years. But just an example of why you have to read all of the documents to see what you can and can't do with those. Another example of a cemetery story that I have is someone was buying, it was actually just it was a big lot, but it was in a city, and there was a burial plot in the backyard. And there was an easement, and the people buying it were like, we don't want them to have access to our backyard, but unfortunately that's what happened. So they had to either buy it subject to basically that easement and the burial plot and access to it, or they had to not buy it. I actually don't remember what happened on that one either. I just remember being fascinated with the fact that someone buried a relative in their backyard. So with that, we'll call it a week. Let me know if you guys have any other topics. If not, we'll see you next week.